Hello, class. My name is Alicia Page. My partner, Shani Galan. We're doing a presentation on art visual perception. The represented cultures. The two cultures that are represented in my presentation focuses on race and age. That is the British children and the Chinese children. The represented cultures were chosen to gauge how each group perceives art at an early age. The study on these visuals for British and Chinese children will measure their thought processes on subject matter, color, and mood metaphor. The knowledge types of culture. I believe Britain is defined by the popular knowledge type, in which their culture's perspectives are similar to those of other Western cultures, in which art is depicted as varied and more freely expressive. Like my partner Shani, agree with me with the ideological knowledge when it refers to China, in which they perceive art as literal messages on the pictures. I took a brief excerpt from my partner's presentation to coincide with the knowledge types of culture for China. East Asians tend to pay more attention to contextual information than Western culture. Traditional versus non-traditional. I believe Britain exudes traditional culture as it relates to art visual perception, which is abstract, expressive, and less rigid. Chinese also exudes traditional culture, which they believe is literal, non-expressive, and non-representational. The social culture orientation. Britain, I believe, are on the lines of individualism, in which this culture expresses their visual perception of art with themselves and the rest of the world. However, China social culture orientation is one of that of collectivism, in which this culture lacks expression of art, visual perception, and unwilling to look beyond a literal interpretation of picture. The methodology. The quantitative study that was presented in my presentation, is on how both British and Chinese children identify certain drawings defined by colors, subject matter, and mood metaphor. The study is measure each culture's art visual perception through cognition with children ages 4 and up. There are two groups. The British children were randomly selected from lower middle class schools in West Midlands, England, and they picked 24-year-olds. The Chinese children, their selection was randomly selected from an undeveloped area of China, which is called Yunnan, and they picked 30 participants. They are also 4 years old, so they could correspond with their British counterparts. This was a matching task where 36 line drawings were used, 24 color, 12 black and white, of everyday objects placed inside 10 by 7 centimeter transparent plastic folders. The, the matching task is very detailed, so I highlighted some key points in where both the British children and the Chinese children had to identify the objects. In the matter of subject matter, they had to identify objects by orientation, type, and size. For example, wall-mounted telephone versus a tabletop telephone. In color, they just had to identify color of the different objects. For example, lamp versus coat. In the mood metaphor, they had to express the mood of the particular object. For example, a broken chair versus a dead tree, whether it's happy or sad. And after tallying up the totals, which was a score of 0 and 4, the British participants received a score of 97%, while the Chinese participants received a score of 95%. My comments on the sample selection. The sample selection between British and Chinese children might not be representative of the population they wish to observe because Chinese children were more pronounced progression in matching on the metaphor than British children. A few of the authors, for example Parson, overgeneralize children who are more far advanced than British children due to each receiving art education as early as the age of 3. Chinese children are also taught a wide variety of shapes, which can produce different images, and how objects can be depicted in different ways and by different materials. Despite these claims from the author Parsons indicating Chinese children are more far advanced, British children scored 2% higher in the quantitative study. The bias in this evaluation. There is no language biases in this measurement of the research. Each sample group were given the instructions as well as the matching pictures in their native language. The chosen variables and dimensions elicit differences by nature of the evaluation, alluding Chinese children were more adept to recognize mood metaphors in pictures, whereas British children kept the mood scene pictures more consistent. In conclusion, this cross-culture quantitative study proposed Chinese children are taught at an early age to pay close attention to detail in pictures. Additionally, Chinese children develop an appropriate strategy at an early age with which they attempted to find links between the selected completion of happy or sad mood metaphor drawing. Chinese children are also taught that art is non-representational in the subject matter as well as art is not self-expressive. On the contrary, British children tend to dismiss the sad completion automatically inferior with mood metaphors in pictures. When the British children were giving the picture of the dating tree that I mentioned earlier in the sample selection, their thought processes mean that it was always a sad picture, so it is good. However, we know that once summer comes around, the tree will eventually grow and bloom and become a beautiful picture. But their thought process is anything that's sad is always sad, and anything that's happy is always a good picture. However, additionally, British children depict subject matter, color, and mood metaphors in art as self-expressive and representational. British and Chinese children differ in visual perception of art. The conclusion fit in the schema. Well, I can say that it's refreshing to know that different cultures internalize information in a different way. It appears that Chinese children receive formal art training at an early age, where they monitor details in pictures, whereas British children from this particular study didn't state if they got formal training, if they had to pay attention to detail, or they learn about mood metaphors. So, in conclusion, fitting to the general schema, I believe that different cultures learn in different times, in different stages in their lives. Cross-cultural differences are apparent through this quantitative study and throughout the world. I would like to thank my class for taking interest into my presentation. Please forgive me for my break in the presentation. I'm not quite familiar with doing these presentations. I'm yet nervous. In addition, I have a cold, but I am very, very open to feedback because just like I learned in this class, I can learn from my fellow students. Thank you.